close your eyes and journey back to a quiet, sun-drenched street in an American town in the summer of 1926. The air is still, save for the rhythmic clip-clop of a horse-drawn delivery wagon and the low, distant hum of a new Ford Model T. You were standing in the golden age of human craftsmanship, a world where time moved slowly because the things we built were designed to stay still. If you look at a house built in that era, you aren't looking at a unit or an asset. You are looking at a monument to permanence. The foundation is fieldstone, the walls are triple brick, and the windows are heavy, hand-poured glass that ripples like water. The man who built that house didn't do so with a 30-year mortgage in his pocket. He built it with sound money. He lived in a world where a dollar was a weight of gold, a world where saving wasn't a gamble against inflation, but a sacred act of stewardship. This was the old world, a world of the handshake, the local bank, and the 100-year vision. In the 1920s, despite the scars of the First Great War, there was a belief that the middle class was emerging as the new aristocracy of quality. We were makers, we were owners, we were sovereign. But beneath this surface of brick and gold, an archaeology of greed was already being written. The fixed anchors of our grandparents' world were being quietly unhooked. As we look at the headlines of 1939, the tanks crossing the Polish border and the sirens screaming over London, we must perform a deep autopsy on the decade that preceded it. Because the Second World War wasn't just a failure of diplomacy, it was a financial reset. It was the moment the old world of quality was sacrificed to make room for the modern world of debt. To understand why the world truly went to war, we have to look at the controlled reset of the 1930s.
The road to 1939 began in the dark corridors of the central banks in 1929. For nearly a century, we have been told that the Great Depression was a mysterious accident of the market, a sudden fever that gripped the global economy. But as economic archaeologists, we see a different pattern. We see a contraction. In the late 1920s, the permission to use money was suddenly withdrawn. The credit that had fueled the boom was snapped shut like a trap. The result wasn't just poverty, it was the systematic liquidation of the independent middle class. Farmers who had owned their land for generations found their handshake loans called in by distant, faceless institutions. Craftsmen who had built the permanent America found themselves standing in breadlines, their skills rendered uneconomic by a system that had frozen the flow of value. This was a liminal space in history. The 1930s were a decade of managed hunger. It was a period designed to break the sovereignty of the individual. When you are hungry, you don't care about the gold standard. When you are desperate, you don't care about craftsmanship. You care about security. The governments of the world realized that as long as the people were independent and their money was sound, they could never be fully mobilized for the total state. To build the war machines of the future, the stewardship of the past had to be destroyed. The Great Depression was the clearinghouse, the fire that burned away the old growth so that the industrial monoculture could be planted in its place. By 1938, the world's major powers were essentially bankrupted by their own central banks. They had reached a debt ceiling that could not be broken by peaceful means. They needed a grand diversion. They needed a heist so large that the previous decade of failure would be forgotten in the smoke of battle.
On September 1st, 1939, the first shots were fired. The mainstream history books tell you about the clash of ideologies, and while those clashes were real and bloody, the economic archaeology reveals a deeper motive. War is the ultimate consumer. In a time of peace, a society builds durable wealth, houses, libraries, and tools. This wealth is static. It doesn't require a constant replacement cycle. But a society at war is a society of infinite consumption. A tank is built to be destroyed. A shell is built to be exploded. A ship is built to be sunk. When the world went to war in 1939, it solved the problem of sound money once and for all. It allowed every government on earth to abandon the fiscal discipline of the gold standard under the guise of national survival. They told the people, "Give us your gold, give us your savings, and in return, we will give you war bonds, promises of future value backed by the very debt we are creating to destroy the world." This was the great risk transfer of the mid-century. The fixed anchor of the dollar was traded for the variable hope of victory. The war provided the reason to centralize everything. It was the birth of the command economy in the West. We moved from a world where value was determined by the quality of the product to a world where value was determined by the velocity of the machine. The 1939 pivot was the moment we traded art for industry. We realized that we couldn't win a total war with hand-carved stone and custom-fitted steel. We needed the assembly line. We needed the standardized unit. We needed the disposable. The war was the birth canal for the replacement economy we have discussed in every chapter of this series. We won the war, but in the process, we lost the ability to live in a world that wasn't fueled by the constant destruction of its own assets.
The intellectual lament of 1939 is most visible in what we call the arsenal of democracy. We are often told this was America's finest hour, the moment our factories turned out a B-24 Liberator every hour. And in a military sense, it was a miracle. But look at the archaeology of that miracle. To win the war, we had to invent planned obsolescence on a planetary scale. Before the war, if you bought a truck, you expected it to last 20 years. But the war truck was designed to survive for 6 months in the mud of France or the sands of Africa. We learned how to build just good enough. We learned how to prioritize speed over substance. We used substitute materials, plastic for wood, stamped tin for cast iron, synthetic rubber for the real thing. When the war ended in 1945, the factories didn't go back to the golden age of craftsmanship. Why would they? They had discovered the holy grail of modern finance, the artificial life cycle. The corporations realized that the war mindset could be applied to the consumer mindset. They had a population that was now conditioned to use and discard. They had a financial system that was now based on infinite debt rather than finite gold. The ugliness of the modern American landscape, the beige boxes and the asphalt deserts, was born in the Quonset fort and the temporary barracks of 1939. We traded the cathedral for the warehouse. We traded the neighborhood for the subdivision. The war didn't just end the Great Depression, it ended the human scale of existence. It created a world that was too big to be owned by the people and too fragile to be maintained without a constant subscription to the industrial machine. We are the financial orphans of 1939, living in the ruins of a quality we can no longer even define.
The final layer of our archaeology reveals the most tragic loss of 1939, the death of local trust. In the old world, before the war, your security was found in your reputation. If you were a man of your word, your community would support you. The small-town bank we will investigate soon was a place where character was more valuable than a credit score. But the total war required total administration. The war introduced the Social Security number, the withholding tax, and the federal oversight into every minute detail of our lives. We were no longer neighbors. We were personnel. We were demographics. The handshake economy was replaced by the bureaucratic economy. This shift was the ultimate heist of identity. By turning every citizen into a unit of the war effort, the government effectively nationalized the American family. They took the sovereignty of the front porch and moved it to the Pentagon. They took the security of the family farm and moved it to the global trade agreement. As the generation that remembers the Golden Age fades, we must realize that the World War never truly ended. It simply moved from the battlefield to the balance sheet. The constant crisis, whether it's a pandemic, a climate shift, or a regional conflict, is the modern version of 1939. It is the excuse used by the system to prevent us from ever returning to sound money and durable living. They want us to stay in the war mindset forever, because as long as we are afraid, we will continue to consume the disposable junk they sell us.
So, as economic archaeologists standing among the industrial graveyards of 26, what is our golden insight? How do we use the tragedy of 1939 to protect our future? First, we must demobilize our minds. We must reject the emergency mindset that the system uses to drive our consumption. In your own life, prioritize the pre-war values, permanence, quality, and local loyalty. Build things that are meant to be inherited. Buy things that are meant to be repaired. Refuse to be a disposable unit in a disposable economy. Second, revalue the handshake. The centralized system is fragile. The local network is resilient. Reclaim your social sovereignty by building deep roots in your community. A neighbor who knows your character is a more valuable asset in a crisis than a digital bank balance that can be frozen with a keystroke. Third, understand that peace is a hard asset. Real wealth is not found in the velocity of debt, but in the silence of ownership. To be debt-free, to be self-sufficient, and to be informed is the only way to exit the 1939 trap. The world of 1926 is gone. We cannot bring back the old world by force, but we can bring back its insight. We can remember that a society is measured by the quality of its peace, not the efficiency of its war. We can stop being consumers of the reset and start being stewards of the legacy. Ownership isn't just about the title to your car, it's about the sovereignty of your soul. Before we go, I want to ask you, when you look at the things your grandparents owned, the tools, the furniture, the photos, do you feel a sense of weight that is missing today? Share your stories of old world quality in the comments below. Let's remind each other what it feels like to live in a world that was built to last. Thank you for watching the Golden Age Insight.